Welcome to GW Integrative Medicine, the podcast about disease prevention and health promotion from the Office of Integrative Medicine and Health at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Before we get into it, let's introduce a new guest host. I'm so excited. Joining us today is Amy. And so tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Amy.
Okay, I'm Dr. Amy Kossoff. I'm an integrative medicine trained internist, and I am the executive director of Access to Integrative Medicine Health Institute, which is the first Washington, D.C. based nonprofit to provide integrative medicine services to people experiencing barriers to care and terminally ill patients, regardless of their ability to pay.
And I'm your co-host, Janet Rodriguez. Today, we discuss peptides and why we should care about them with Dr. Misha Kogan, professor of medicine at GW, chief medical officer at the GW Center for Integrative Medicine, and founder of Access to Integrative Medicine Health Institute.
Dr. Kogan is board certified in internal medicine, geriatric medicine, hospice and palliative medicine, and integrative medicine. He's a leading expert in the field of integrative geriatrics, healthy aging, and medical cannabis.
He's a frequent speaker at national and international conferences on the topics of integrative medicine and geriatrics, neurodegenerative diseases, and the use of medical cannabis. When he isn't in the clinic or the classroom authoring a book or being published in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal, Misha is one of the co-hosts of the podcast.
Welcome, Misha.
Well, thank you guys. Yeah, it's kind of funny how I'm just sitting here listening to all these intros, which I'm usually doing myself. So it's nice not to do that.
Okay, so what are peptides and why are they everywhere in the news?
Right. Well, so let's start with why they're in the news and why we're doing the podcast. Because I don't think that we were planning to do the podcast with a particular time issue, but it did become sensitive when the HHS RFK recently announced that they're going to push for peptides to be FDA approved, or rather not FDA prohibited, so to speak, right? So there was also this gray area about the peptides as to what is legal and what is not legal, and what can be obtained with good quality and not. So I think that's why we decided to do this. But let's start with what are peptides, right? I mean, because presumably everybody understands, but let's clarify a few things. So first of all, peptides are kind of a short protein. So you can think of them as a link of a small number of chained together amino acids. So they're really tiny proteins and they naturally occur. So our body makes these peptides in mass. I think there are probably hundreds, if not thousands of those peptides that our body produces, and they are signaling molecules. Think of them like basically couple of letters tied together into the word. So the word may be, 10, 20, 30 letters, and they're producing some kind of regulatory signal. So they would regulate our hunger. They can control inflammation. They can induce wound healing. They can boost immune function. They can allow for some hormones to be released. What's interesting for me with my interest in neurodegeneration is they actually are supposed to control some of the memory process and sleep and other things that are related specifically to neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's, for example. And they're not new. That's another thing. Like a lot of people oh, peptides new. No, they're not new. We know a lot of them already, and we're gonna get to talk about that in a second.
So influencers are promoting peptides as a cure-all. But what does the science say about the health benefits and risks of taking them?
Yeah, so it probably is wise to separate all the peptides into three large groups, right? So you got something that's already in use. So people not to be surprised, like the insulin. The insulin is a peptide, right? I mean, insulin has been in use for many, many decades. It's a FDA-regulated medication. Most recently, of course, the GLP-1s, such as semaglutide, Ozempic, tirzepatide, et cetera, they are FDA approved for weight loss. So they are classic peptides. But there are many others. There's oxytocin, there's calcitonin, there is a parathyroid hormone, teriparatide, there's a VIP. So there's a whole list. And a lot of them already been used. So that's a category number one. So FDA regulated, safety is well understood. Obviously, insulin can be unsafe if you take too much, right? I mean, you can drop your sugar and have a serious side effects, but we understand the concepts there and we understand how to use them, right? Now, there's the second category or second bucket, let's call it, which is kind of exciting, new, no human studies or very few human studies, but very strong signal in preclinical studies and in animal models. So these are the things like, we're going to talk about them. These are the things like BPC 157, KPV, thymosin beta 4, so TB4, TB 500. So we'll talk about those. And then there's the wild, wild west, right? So then these are the things that, we're not going to talk about, but they're often produced in China. They're often can be contaminated. We don't know anything about their quality control. So I would say completely stay away from those. And I'm not even going to go there because I think in this wild, wild west category, the safety is probably so broadly on a spectrum that, how do you figure out, am I going to get a good product or unsafe product? And what are the actual side effects? We just don't even know. With the bucket number 2, the safety is also not very clear. I mean, we think that for short term, many of them are relatively safe, but what happens if somebody decides to take this stuff for a long time? There's just not enough data to make any particular statement.
Interesting. Now, are you going to explain to us a little bit about what all those letters and numbers were about?
Sure. So, uh, yeah, so let's start with BPC 157, right? So, by the way, a lot of these names are really funny, right? So, but they actually make a lot of sense. So the BPC 157, you would like, what? Like, what, like, we don't have drugs that have such stuff, right? But there's actually logic. So peptides are often described by the way they were found. And actually, let's do a little bit of a point of history here because it's actually quite cool. So the peptides are really old, right? So they were discovered literally like 100 years ago. In 1902, the first peptide secretin was discovered, which is basically a hormone more than well, it is a hormone. It's just also a peptide. And then, of course, the insulin was discovered in 1921. And then basically actually, literally, the insulin was a drug or peptide that completely transformed medicine, right? Before the insulin care for type 1 diabetes, I mean, it's just supportive and people died very quickly. So that totally changed the way we practice medicine. And then the obvious explosion of research started around 2000. And one of the reasons had something to do with what we call a recombinant biotechnology, where we can take peptide that's isolated from the blood and then we can multiply it, right? So the original peptides, they were bioidentical. I mean, they were literally just, I don't know whether they were made from animal or somehow from human blood, but the original discoveries were from there. So now, of course, most of the peptides that you're going to find on the market that I can say, okay, you can consider trying those, they would be synthetic. So they're no longer made through the reproduction of the protein, but they made through the more specific synthetic process. So now let's go to that funny name, the BPC 157. So BPC stands for body protection compound, and you guessed it, 157 is just a number that they discovered. It's the number 157 that was found somewhere. This particular one is found in very large amounts in our gastric juices. So the original thought was that they're somehow protecting our stomach. Let's say we have, it's like you have some kind of an ulcer in the stomach or an infection, so that the repair is required. So the belief is that this compound will help. In fact, BPC 157 literally built cult-like following because people now taking it for all kinds of repairs, whether it's stomach repairs or tendon. So it's used in orthopedics, inflammatory bowel disease, etc. So that's the name. Now I mentioned a couple others. So I mentioned thymosin beta 4. That's also TB4. So that's an acronym short. But then there's things like KPV, and KPV is a short molecule that is a part of alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone that's just a fragment of it. So we'll come back to that one as well. So yeah, so that's the names. The names are basically derived from how they originally identified.
Now, are those approved already, or are those the Wild Wild West?
So the ones that I just mentioned, the 3 that we're going to discuss in some detail, the BPC 157, KPV, and then TB4 and TB 500, they're not necessarily FDA approved, right? For the FDA to approve something, you have to have a double-blind randomized controlled trial that proves that it's effective for a particular whatever. But
So
FDA's
does it fall under that weird supplement
Well,
category?
no, not interestingly, no,
Okay.
because a lot of these things more effective when they injected. And anything injectable must be in US. Anything injectable must be produced in a compounding pharmacy or in a regular pharmacy. Now, if there is no large pharmaceutical company that makes a product to sell, right? So then it will be made by a compounder. Now, because these molecules are very simple and easy to make, compounders can make them quite quickly. And it's not the sourcing these materials is very easy. But it's interesting that, you're looking at natural molecules, right? So for them to become sold through the pharmacies, you have to patent a particular way of making it. You cannot patent natural compounds. So you cannot just patent BP 157 and say, I own it. Well, because it's in our bodies. You can patent it based on how you produce it, right? So we're not there yet, right? So there's no other peptides of those three or four peptides I mentioned. None of them are actually FDA approved or sold through the large pharmaceutical companies. But it doesn't. If in the past, FDA prohibited those substances to be made in formal compounding pharmacy and be prescribed by a physician. That wasn't available. Now, of course, they were still made. People were still buying them and from various places, and that was a problem because how they were made and who was selling them. Now, there are now some people going to ask. You have a lot of peptides sold now through supplement companies. Now, the difference is those are sold for oral administration or sublingual. And the question there is, well, what is bioavailability of something? So we started discussing slowly the PPC 157. That's extremely resistant to the gastric juices. It's very stable molecule. It's liposomally can be produced. So there are now brands that I can trust that I can have the people take it orally. And that probably will work. And the reason probably is because, again, there's no human studies, right? So there are preclinical studies, there's small human control trials that are not even worth discussing because they're not randomized, they're too small. And how do you use this? But, anecdotally, at least with the BPC 157, we are seeing something. So we definitely have some of my patients swear by it. I mean, I have seen some people improve taking it. Now, does that mean anything? It's science has to really prove things in a much more concrete way. A couple of patients coming to Dr. Misha Kogan saying, I feel better on this, could just be a placebo, or could be God knows what else. So, you do have to be accurate here and precise. But nonetheless, I think that the total value of the preclinical data is so strong that I don't think in the long run we're going to have. I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a pathways of figuring out how it's going to work, where are the safe limits, how should it be administered, is the oral better than the injectable? None of these questions have any answers. And that's where we need study. What's interesting is this kind of a HHS push hopefully will also assign some research dollars, because right now there is going to be no interest in pharma in doing this until they can get something FDA approved, right? Because, if it's not FDA approved and if it's not patented, then they're not going to make any money. So the pharma is not going to go there. Compounders are going to have no capacity to make claims. So it's not clear how this will grow. So,
Friends, if you ever want to know how the sausage gets made, Dr. Kogan will always tell you.
sausage? No, I won't. I have no idea how sausages are made. We will have
No,
to.
it's an expression. When usually all you see is the results
Correct.
or the product, and people don't know anything about how things are made or how it got to market or why something isn't approved as of yet.
Well, and then we have problems, right? And something doesn't get approved, or it gets approved, then gets contaminated, then gets pulled off. Anyway.
What's
Yeah.
quality control like in compounding pharmacies?
Well, so that's a great question, right? So, and it also brings the bigger question, right? I mean, what is the quality control right now of all these peptides? Well, again, if you're in that first bucket where we're talking about insulin, the GLPs, et cetera, well, I mean, that's a standard drug like quality control. Believe it or not, in compounding pharmacies, quality control is good. Compounders by law are required to follow a bunch of specific steps, right? So when they're buying the raw material for compounding, they have to obtain it from the certified chemical producer. something like Sigma or others. Then they have to follow certain sterile compounding procedures, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not an expert in this, and actually, it may be a great idea. We have a wonderful expert in our midst. Janet and I have, or maybe you guys did it without me. You know who I'm talking about, the pharmacist from Mitchell.
You mean Mark or
No.
Sweden?
Sudan. That's right.
Yeah.
So we have
Sahar.
a person.
We should have Sahar on again.
Yeah, we should absolutely have, because I think this is a really important conversation about, so this field will not necessarily go straight to pharma. So this field will deeply go into compounders. So I think for people to understand, because I can only generally tell you that I think they're more than adequate. In fact, I actually think that in some aspects, they often do better job than the regular pharmacists, than the regular drugs. Now, people are going to critique me for saying this, but the reason for that is simple. When you're making in mass product in a large amounts that constantly follow certain standards, there is a risk at this large volume to screw up things. And yes, there's also risk to screw up things in the small batches, but believe it or not, when it's done appropriately, I almost feel like there's a slightly better quality control when you do it this way. So in a bucket that will be the bucket number 2, once the compounders truly begin to allow to make them and sell them through the prescription, I think the quality is going to be just like as good as in a quality with. And again, don't kill me for this message, in part because yes, there is some periodic problems and compounders have been under fire from FDA for certain things. But again, put all that aside, I don't think that I think those things are honestly more political.
Mhm.
Problems always occur. There's medications that are being recalled. There's some compounding substances that are being recalled over the years. I mean, that's just human errors, what they expected.
Yeah.
Now, once you get to the point where you buying some BPC 157 injectable, not from US compounder, which is what's currently happening, well, or if you are buying it from US currently, but it's not a legal compounder, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think the quality control is probably going to be very, very variable. I don't want to negate some people's good benefits, because there probably are some good apples, but I'm guaranteeing you that there are a lot of bad apples too. Now, in a third category, in the wild, wild west, where a lot of peptides made in China, et cetera, I would say zero quality control. So, if somebody knows a company that they believe doing a good job, that doesn't guarantee the quality, right? It simply means you've been lucky so far that they didn't screw anything up. Typically anything made in a supplement company has to follow something called GMP, good manufacturing practices. Is that enough to assure quality? Probably not. It's much looser category. I mean, they just have to require certain steps of manufacturing product. That doesn't require them to get the raw materials perfectly controlled, et cetera, et cetera. So you got lots of loopholes around this topic, however you look at it. Now, will that change? Yeah, I'm sure it will. Right. So the moment it has to, because otherwise, there's going to be continuous distrust. And also, I'm pretty sure that we're going to start seeing problems, right? I mean, it's just like with anything else, the history repeats itself in the sense that when something new and exciting gets on the market, there's going to be copycats that are going to try to, get the piece of a pie, and they're going to shortcut safety procedures, and then it's going to have problems.
So do you feel comfortable talking about the topical versions, or?
Yeah, there are topical versions. I've heard of them. They would probably be kind of similar to how you would do it orally.
Mm-hmm.
I have only seen BPC 157 applied that way. I mean, I don't know. The KPV, which is another one, let me segue there for a second, because it is an important one. KPV actually has a little bit of a clinical study. So there has been an attempt at looking into controlled trials. So there's at least a couple of small human trials. And so that one, if you apply it topically, it induces immune regulation mechanisms. So theoretically, both BPC as a booster of repair and KPV as a kind of an immune regulator, an anti-inflammatory molecule, if you will, or peptide. Theoretically, you would expect some benefits. Now, that is the question I cannot answer, because I have not seen a single patient come to me and say, oh, my eczema is getting better with topical application. That's a great idea. Typically, when you're looking at anything that doesn't go inside the body, and my position, right? My best prescribed cannabis is the topical cannabis. So, the point is that they're probably going to be a huge potential here. And also, they're going to be easier to make. right? The topical products, creams and such, they fall into categories often of cosmetics. So I would expect that these products are going to really hit the market heavy on like skin quality, longevity domains. Again, not my topic of expertise, but nonetheless, I think this is going to be a extremely exciting area. I have no doubt that in the next 5 to 10 years, some of this topical application is going to be almost standardized in the cosmetic industry. It's just a matter of timing.
Lee and I have a person.
Oh, you already do.
One of her integrative medicine program grads is a skincare
So did I say anything wrong here?
producer. No. It sounded pretty good to me.
Yeah. So I actually.
So as someone in geriatrics, are patients coming to you and asking you about peptides, or are they admitting to usage?
That's right. So I would expect more people asking. Yes. In short, absolutely yes. But it's not yet hit the level like the supplements, right? I mean, I would say 2/3 of the patients who seek me out, they're going to be coming in already taking stuff, right? Some kind of supplement. Well, why? Well, the people read and they have neighbors who, whatever. It's just peptides haven't hit that level of common use.
Okay.
But I'm beginning to regularly get asked, and I'm getting asked questions more in a kind of a wrong way, if you will, right? The people is like, well, what peptide should I take, right? Instead of asking, well, how the peptide's going to help my particular problem. And that's the reason, like, you can't really ask that question because there's no data to support any answer. So, the fact that, okay, BPC is used in some orthopedics and for tissue repair and then GI for, ulcers, for colitis, for inflammatory bowel disease. Yeah, but there, you can't find a study that claims benefit, whether the study is randomized or not even. So we're not even there yet. I mean, forget in a long-term point where in order for something to get FDA approved, you actually have to have a sizable double-blind randomized control trial. We don't have any of that. We don't even have a small study. We only have a couple.
Now, when you keep on saying small study, are we talking about less than a dozen people or like
No, we're talking about like a couple of dozen of patients.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're talking about kind of an early pilots. That's how we would characterize studies like this. Pilots sometimes are controlled, but when you're looking at 20 patients on each side, you can say, okay, there's a strong signal here. Maybe it's even okay safety-wise, because if you're thinking about this, think about it this way, right? If these molecules are inside of us, what could be unsafe? Well, what could be unsafe is that when there's too much of a particular molecule, you could be triggering some response, right? But at least that these molecules are not going to be toxic to our system, right? I mean, our body knows how to handle them. Now, they could definitely trigger allergies in large amounts. They could trigger some weird signaling that's not supposed to be there, sure. But that's not going to be potentially as dangerous as, some of the other chemicals that, we know.
So a good sample size is like what, 100 people?
Well, I mean, thousands. It depends on the condition. Okay. Well, it depends on the condition. If you're looking at the condition where simple signal would mean some very concrete benefit. Let me give you an example of condition that I'm very familiar with, Alzheimer's disease, where we obviously desperately need effective treatment. And so what's really interesting is that the third molecule I mentioned, the TMB or thymosin beta 4, that's actually one of the compounds that is also supposed to help regeneration. But there has been a little bit of an interest in this in neurologic disorders because this molecule is found in the brain. And so we do think that both TB4 and TB500 theoretically can be applicable to the neurodegenerative diseases, particularly Alzheimer's. So in that condition, the trial doesn't have to be very big, right? Because, it's a relentlessly progressive disorder to which even if you slow it down a little bit, that's a huge step forward. So you're going to need to do study a bit longer, not for a few weeks, but, maybe 6 to 12 months. But you probably don't need to have thousands of patients. I mean, you'll be enough having probably less than 100 even on each side. And it'll be enough to generate something called power. So in a statistical analysis, we use the concept of power. So if the power is sufficient, when you detect the signal, it's a true signal. So, but for some other diseases, that signal detection needs to be much, much broader. So you may need to have thousands. Osteoarthritis is a good example. You have a very large placebo effect in osteoarthritis. So in osteoarthritis, for effective study, you'll need thousands of patients. Yeah, that's hard to do. So, and by the way, since we're talking about this concept of using peptides for specific diseases, particularly for Alzheimer's, there is now a bunch of other new molecules, right? So there is a very big interest in mitochondrial health, and there are a number of mitochondrial peptides, the humanine OTSC. So there's some mitochondrial derived peptides, and have a very significant potential for repair of the tissues in Alzheimer's. So in basically, we know that in Alzheimer's, one of the biggest triggers is your energy production in the brain drops out. And so what happens there is you can't make enough energy. So the cells beginning to literally clog up with the garbage, with the plaques and tangles, and then they die. So if you can rev up mitochondrial, you're theoretically going to slow it down or even to reverse some of this pathology. So there's a huge interest. Now, none of this has any yet human studies, but I'm pretty sure they're coming for the same exact reason that all the current Alzheimer's medications, the anti-plaque medications have been developed. There's a huge commercial potential. You can imagine a number of patients living with Alzheimer's and the fact that it's a relentlessly progressive disorder. So this will happen. Now, is the time for people to start using TB4 and TB500, humanine and MOTS-C for Alzheimer's? No. I mean, we don't even have a clear idea, will these molecules, if you take them as a shot or orally, get to the brain? We don't even have such a basic information as that. I mean, this is all we're talking about preclinical data in an animal models, mostly in mice, by the way, not even in the larger animals. So will that translate to humans? We'll see.
So just before we conclude, just finally, what should health professionals know when people are asking about peptides and about peptides people can buy offline? And then just give us a couple of clinical pearls.
Yeah, so I would say that, if they're getting it from trusted supplement company for the oral use, and patients are simply saying, look, I'm exhausted at all of the things I need to try something else for, let's say, I don't know, some tissue repair, some chronic mild orthopedic issues that cannot be fixed with other methods. I actually feel okay for people to get them from the trusted supplement sources, whether it's a topical application or oral. Now, obviously, injectable, if you're not getting them from a compounder, I would never tell any practitioner to allow any of their patients to get injectable forms from China. I mean, that self-explanatory sounds insane, right? I mean, you do have to follow regulations of our own country. And, if you have a patient who's telling I'm traveling to China to get this stuff, well, I would tell the practitioners to discourage patients from doing that because, again, who knows the quality of this process over there. But for the oral products, I mean, there are good brands. I'm going to stay away from telling people what those brands are. I think it's not in the spirit of our podcast right now, at least since I am ultimately familiar with these products. But I do have, at least, I've started using Quicksilver. I can say that just because that's been what I'm recommending to my patients because I know the quality of the brand. I've used it for other medications. But other products are probably just as fine. And there's a lot of good supplement companies that are beginning to use those products. So find one and use for that. Now the pearls, well, I mean, you caught me off guard here. There's really not a
You've actually really given us a few already.
Well, but they're not true pearls that I can say, okay, that is a pearl I would like my patients to try, right? I mean, it's still very preliminary and I'm kind of guard at what I'm saying because, again, the medicine ultimately has to be relatively conservative. Otherwise, wild, wild west is the description, but every major breakthrough in medicine starts with a promising idea, right? So the insulin was once experimental. Look at now, GLP-1s were experimental, monoclonal antibodies. So the question is not whether they are real or fake. I mean, that's an irrelevant question. The question is how quickly will the science move here to pick up those pearls of which I can come back in 2 years and report something back to you guys. But right now, all I can say is the signals that we are observing. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining, Misha.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on our own podcast. So, as a Even though I will tell you, this is the first time I had to spend a lot of time preparing. So if listeners are hearing some of the pieces almost being read, that's not necessarily off kilt, because I actually did have to do a lot of deep dive, because I really, that's not my area of expertise. I generally try to follow the science and try to learn things that a bit more grounded in evidence based rather than.
Yeah, well, this kind of came at us suddenly.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're living in an interesting political time that things that don't have strong evidence gets pushed upwards, and I think we don't do politics here, right?
Right.
Yeah, no politics.
No.
All right, friends, this is the GW Integrative Medicine podcast from the GW Office of Integrative Medicine and Health.
I'm Dr. Amy.
And I'm Janet Rodriguez.
Thanks for listening.